The interview was expected to be a complete destruction of Trump on live television. But what happened next turned into the biggest nightmare of the host's career. She thought she had prepared the perfect trap. For weeks, her team had meticulously researched, crafting the sharpest questions they were convinced would corner Trump, leaving him flustered and exposed before a national audience. But in just a few minutes, everything fell apart. The atmosphere in the studio grew thick with tension, as if an invisible force had tightened its grip, suffocating the confidence of the journalist. The audience fell silent, and the crew members in the control room glanced at each other nervously. No one spoke, but everyone could feel that something had gone terribly wrong. Trump, sitting calmly, was unfazed. He hadn't just seen through the trap. He was about to turn it to his advantage. And when he struck back, it wasn't just the journalist who was left stunned. The entire network was in shock. Within seconds, the power had shifted. No longer was the host in control of the narrative. Now it belonged to the man she had tried to bring down. And what happened next shook the entire media landscape in America. Primetime, a major television network, millions watching live. The atmosphere in the studio was tight as a wire. Powerful spotlights illuminated the center of the stage, where two figures faced each other. She thought she had prepared the perfect trap. For weeks, her team had meticulously researched, crafting the sharpest questions they were convinced would corner Trump, leaving him flustered and exposed before a national audience. She had meticulously planned for this moment for weeks. A perfectly orchestrated plan. 3 weeks earlier, when the show confirmed Trump as a special guest, Catherine's editorial team immediately sprang into action. Endless meetings followed. Hundreds of Trump's past speeches were dissected. Her media strategy team analyzed every word, every gesture he had made in debates and interviews. Their one and only goal: find his weak spots. A long list of sensitive topics was compiled. Family? Yes. Marriage? Perfect. Controversial statements from the past? Unmissable. They knew that in order to make Trump lose control, they couldn't just attack him head-on. They needed to play a more sophisticated game. Catherine had to guide the conversation carefully, luring Trump into a psychological trap, making him stumble on live television. But Trump wasn't a typical politician. He didn't fear the media. He wasn't afraid of difficult questions. He had gone head-to-head with hundreds of journalists like Catherine before, and he knew exactly how this game worked. She thought he would fall into the trap. But Trump not only saw through it, he was ready to turn it into a lesson for all of America. The secret meeting, a strategic discussion. 3 days before the interview, in a secluded conference room inside the network's headquarters, Catherine and her editorial team sat around a large table. On the screen in front of them, a series of old clips of Trump played, showing how he had flipped the script on previous media attacks. A senior strategist spoke up. Trump doesn't react like normal politicians. He doesn't play defense. He goes on the offensive. If we let him dictate the pace of the conversation, he will flip the entire situation in his favor. Catherine crossed her arms, her sharp eyes fixed on the screen. Then we won't give him that opportunity. She pointed at the list of questions on the table. We'll start off gently, make him believe this is just a normal conversation. Then, she paused, flashing a calculated smile, we hit him hard on his family. The room fell silent. One of the producers hesitated. But attacking his family, isn't that too risky? If his reaction is too strong, the audience might turn against us. Catherine shook her head. No. On the contrary, if we phrase it correctly, the audience will see a vulnerable Trump. They'll see a man being backed into a corner. She leaned forward, emphasizing each word. This is television. Emotions are everything. The moment of truth. Back to the present. The countdown clock on set ticked down. 3, 2, 1. The broadcast went live. All of America was watching. Catherine sat up straight, adjusted her blazer, and took a deep breath. She knew this moment would define her career. Trump knew it too. He looked directly at her, his expression unwavering, not a single sign of nervousness, not even a hint of uncertainty. As if he had already seen everything that was about to happen. And within just a few minutes, This battle for power would take an unexpected turn that no one could have predicted. The atmosphere in the studio grew heavy, suffocating. Trump remained completely composed. In fact, he was in full control of the game. Catherine realized it. The confident smile on her face faltered ever so slightly. A small but telling sign to those paying close attention that her plan was beginning to derail. But a seasoned journalist like Catherine was not one to give up easily. She adjusted her posture, leaning forward just a little, pretending to still hold the upper hand. But Mr. Trump, you have to admit that for someone like Melania, life by your side isn't easy. Many say she doesn't have real freedom, that she is bound by your shadow, that she cannot escape from being defined by you. Trump narrowed his eyes. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. He looked at Catherine, then slowly turned his gaze to the camera. Then, in a measured but powerful voice, he spoke. How interesting. When a woman chooses to stand by her husband, people say she's being controlled. But when she opposes him, the media calls her independent. Do you see the hypocrisy in how the media frames women, Catherine? The studio went silent. This was not the answer Catherine had expected. Instead of defending or justifying, Trump flipped the script. He didn't fall into the trap she had set. He exposed the very flaw in her question. Catherine felt her heartbeat quicken. She had lost the upper hand, but she couldn't back down now. What do you mean? Catherine asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Trump leaned back slightly, fingers interlocked, his gaze unwavering. I mean that a woman is only considered free when she does what the media expects of her. But when she chooses to live life on her own terms, when she decides not to be in the headlines every day, not to engage in public spectacles, not to get caught up in pointless debates, suddenly she's labeled as trapped. A sharp knife slicing through the facade of the question. Catherine shifted slightly in her seat, trying to regain her footing, but Trump wasn't done. His voice remained calm but carried undeniable weight. Do you know why the media hates Melania? Catherine pressed her lips together. Trump didn't need her to answer. Because she doesn't play by your rules. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even members of the studio crew exchanged glances. Catherine knew she couldn't let Trump keep steering the conversation. She made a split-second decision to change tactics. But you can't deny that, without you, Melania wouldn't have the position she holds today. She smirked, believing she had finally found her leverage. But she was wrong. Trump chuckled. But it wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was the knowing laugh of someone who had already won the game. Have you ever wondered why this question is only asked about women like Melania? Froze. Trump gestured toward the camera, as if addressing millions of viewers watching at home. Why is it that when a man succeeds with the support of his wife, no one ever asks, would he have achieved this without her? But when a strong woman stands by a powerful man, the first assumption is that she has no worth beyond his name? The studio fell completely silent. Paused deliberately, letting his words settle in the thickened air. Melania didn't need me to have value. She had value long before she met me. She is intelligent, dignified, accomplished, and above all, she doesn't need media approval to validate her significance. A chill ran down Catherine's spine. Trump wasn't just staying in control, he was turning this interview into a lesson on how the media treats strong women. But she wasn't ready to give up just yet. She had one final move left. A question she was convinced Trump wouldn't be able to dodge. A question that would shock the entire nation. She took a deep breath, then spoke, her voice slow and sharp. So tell me, Mr. Trump, have you ever considered trading up? Given your position, your power, surely you could have a younger, fresher wife if you wanted to? The studio froze. Some audience members gasped audibly. A few turned to each other, shocked that Catherine had dared to go this far. But Trump didn't flinch. There was no sign of surprise, no hesitation, only a long, deafening silence. Then Trump slowly leaned forward, his gaze razor-sharp. And the words he spoke next would become one of the most unforgettable moments in television history. Catherine did not realize she had just crossed the line. She believed that her last question would be the decisive blow, a strike so direct that Trump couldn't possibly evade it, but she had miscalculated. The studio fell into a strange silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows a difficult question. It was the kind of silence that signals a sudden shift in power. Seconds passed. No one spoke. Trump didn't frown. He didn't grimace. He didn't push back. He simply sat there, completely composed, looking at Catherine as if she had just uttered something insignificant. Then he slowly leaned forward, his eyes locked onto hers. "Do you know what's interesting about this question, Catherine?" His voice wasn't harsh, it wasn't defensive, it was simply a calm inquiry. But that calmness was unnerving. "This question isn't about me at all." He paused, letting his words sink into the thick tension of the studio. Then his voice dropped, each word like a hammer breaking through a wall of pretense. "This question only reveals how you see the value of a person." The studio was frozen. Shifted slightly in her chair, a small movement but enough for the observant to recognize that she was beginning to lose her composure. She had expected a smug Trump, an angry Trump, or a Trump trying to justify himself. But the Trump sitting before her was none of those things. Trump leaned back in his chair, his sharp gaze cutting through her like an X-ray. "You are sitting here, on national television, in front of millions of people, and suggesting that love, loyalty, and commitment can be upgraded like a luxury item?" Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some viewers began nodding, others exchanged glances of disbelief. Even the production team, the cameramen, the director, they were all sensing that something fundamental was shifting. Trump was not the one being cornered. He was taking control. And Catherine knew it. She tried to regain her footing, opened her mouth to speak, but Trump did not give her the chance. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping lower, resonating across the studio. "People don't upgrade their life partners, Catherine, they cherish them." A powerful blow, a direct hit to the core of the entire debate, and it landed perfectly. Applause began to spread. At first, just a few people, but soon, an entire section of the audience joined in. This wasn't the usual polite clapping that talk shows often prompted. This was recognition. Recognition that Trump had just turned a provocative question into a profound statement about love, loyalty, and human dignity. And this was never part of Catherine's plan. She felt her breath quicken, but she forced herself to stay composed. She had lost control of the interview. She had become the one being questioned. Trump wasn't done. He turned to the camera, as if speaking not just to the audience in the studio, but to the entire country. "There are millions of people watching this show right now, and I have a question for them. How many of you have spent decades with the person you love? Built a life together, faced hardships, celebrated victories, shared both laughter and sorrow? And how many of you have ever been asked a question like this?" The murmurs in the studio intensified. Catherine felt the interview spiraling further out of her control. She tried to interject, but Trump shut it down before she could. He raised a hand as if telling her, "I'm not finished. There is something the media will never understand. And that is the real value of a relationship. You asked me whether I ever thought about trading up my wife." Trump shook his head slowly, as if he couldn't believe someone would even pose such a question. "You are confusing love with ownership. You are confusing loyalty with convenience. You are confusing a true relationship with a transaction." Catherine had nothing to say. She just sat there, desperately trying to hold on to whatever control she had left. But Trump had obliterated the very trap she had set. Applause erupted throughout the studio. Some audience members jumped to their feet, while others nodded in agreement. Even those who opposed Trump had to admit that he had just delivered an unshakable response. And Catherine? She could only try to hide the growing unease that was now evident on her face. Catherine could no longer smile. Everything she and her editorial team had painstakingly constructed had crumbled to dust. The sharp, meticulously crafted questions they had believed would catch Trump off guard had now become a boomerang, swinging back with devastating force. striking the very person who had thrown it. She could feel a cold sweat trickling down her spine, despite the studio's air conditioning running at full power. She had lost control of the interview. She was no longer the one steering the conversation, because now Trump was no longer just answering a question. He was teaching a lesson, and all of America was listening. Trump never took his eyes off the camera. He wasn't looking at Catherine anymore, because his real opponent wasn't her. It was an entire media system that had gone unchallenged for far too long. We do not judge people by their age or their appearance. We judge them by their loyalty, their sacrifices, and their genuine love. The entire studio audience rose to their feet, erupting in applause. Not just Trump supporters, but also neutral viewers, people who had simply tuned in for an interview and suddenly realized they were witnessing something far bigger than they had expected. Something rare in modern television. Truth. No evasive rhetoric, no rehearsed political talking points. Just a man standing up for the values of his family. And Catherine? She bowed her head in silence. She had nothing left to say. Any attempt at rebuttal was meaningless now. The remaining questions she had prepared were now nothing more than worthless scraps of paper. The show still had time left, but she couldn't continue. Not because Trump had crushed her with anger or personal attacks, but because she had been undone by her own questions. The very questions she had believed would expose a man had instead exposed the very industry she represented. Trump leaned back in his chair, his gaze still cold and unwavering. A frantic producer waved at Catherine from behind the cameras, signaling her to redirect the conversation, salvage what was left. But she had nothing left to ask. She knew it, Trump knew it, and millions of Americans knew it too. A historic moment. Social media exploded while the interview was still airing. News outlets raced to update live coverage, dissecting every moment. Clips from the interview were shared millions of times within hours. Trump's words became the focal point of discussions on every major forum. People don't upgrade their life partners. They cherish them. This question isn't about me at all. It only reveals how you see the value of a person. You are confusing love with ownership. His words landed like sledgehammers against the foundations of modern media. No one cared what Catherine's next question was, because the battle was already over. There was no need for another word. As the broadcast ended, the audience remained in their seats, unwilling to leave. Some people were still clapping, not because they idolized Trump, but because they had just witnessed something they hadn't seen on television in a long time. A real conversation, unedited, unfiltered. A conversation where the guest had won, not through shouting, not through threats, but through truth. A show, a lesson, a moment that won't be forgotten. What was supposed to be just another interview had turned into a pivotal moment in media history. A lesson on human values, the media, and how we judge people. It wasn't just about Trump or Catherine, it was about every single viewer watching. What do you think? Has the media twisted the true value of human relationships? Are we judging people the wrong way, based on shallow standards imposed by someone else? Share your thoughts below, because this story isn't just about them. It's about all of us. What's your take on this? Do you agree with Trump? Let us know in the comments. If you found this story thought-provoking, hit the like button and share it with others. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another compelling story. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.